So, we are so excited today to be with author Rudy Reyes, who is the author of The Tamale Letter. And so, Rudy, thank you for joining us and just tell us about your book.
Thank you so much. I love this book because it's based on the true story of my family, starting with my grandfather, Anastasio Reyes. It starts back when he's 10 years old in Mexico. He's an orphan. We don't know over the years, because we heard these stories, what happened to our great grandparents. But he was an orphan at 10. He would go from family to family members, relatives, to stay with them. But there were also poor and didn't have the food or really the space for him. So, they would push him along to another family member and all this until he was around 10 years old. And then he saw this store in Mexico and had a storekeeper and his wife. It was a two-story. They lived upstairs. The store was downstairs. And so he went in looking for work. And the storekeeper, hired him to clean the floors, wash the dishes, do all this stuff, and restock the shelves. So he worked there for about 10 years. And the storekeeper was very strict and didn't really give him any love like you should for a little 10-year-old boy, especially who's working, you know, in that situation. The storekeeper's wife did. She got to love Anastasio as her own son. And, but kind of going back to how the story about my grandfather started, that ever since my brother and I and my sisters, they're much younger than I am, I'm the oldest, and then my cousins, as we were growing up, we would hear these stories of our family, and we were just in awe because it was during the Great Depression, um, and then World War II until present time and such. Uh, we loved it because they were very functional family, loving family, and there was no abuse, there was no uh, bad words, nothing like this. They were very faithful, religious family. And they taught true family values to all their children who grew up and had children of their own. One being my father, who, you know, but it's based on a true story. I had to get input from other five cousins of mine, and one was a second cousin because she's much older, but she knew my grandfather Anastasio and my grandmother Maria, and and so I got input from them, and I heard stories all together from different sources, and I just started writing it down. And I've always wanted to write it down, and but my uncle Jesse, who's kind of the main character in there, besides my grandfather, he was the one in World War II, and uh, when I told him I wanted to write the Tamale letter, he said, "No, I don't want you to write it. I don't want it because it's based on his situation during the war." And uh, I kind of was dismayed, so I hesitated. And then after he passed away, I spoke to his two sons, and they said, "Sure, go ahead and write it about my father, our father." So I did. Um, I'll give you a brief outline of what the story is. My grandfather, Anastasio, went with a caravan when he was around 12 to come to Texas. Back then, they had open borders because they needed to work for the fields. Texas, especially South Texas, had a bunch of fruits, trees, and everything that they need someone to work the field and stuff. My grandfather was 12. He got into helping a person who cooked. He would build the fires and he learned how to cook meals and everything. And then he was very self-sufficient and hardworking person. And then when he was on 18, he met my grandmother. They just lived down the street from each other. My grandfather would walk to work. Uh, and it's they got married. Kind of in the before the marriage started, they asked her father what he did for her hand, and he said no. So they kind of were having, you know, they fell in love and they just didn't want to be away from each other. They wanted to get married, so they went to her uncle, the brother of her father, my great grandfather, and he said yes. I'll support. And back then, they had to pay for the full wedding and everything, the banquet, the meals, and everything. So, and he was very well off, and so he paid for everything. Eventually, my great grandfather, the father of my grandmother Maria, came around and started, accepting my grandfather as his son-in-law. They had 5 children, one being my father and such. I go from age down. Isabel was the oldest, and she became the mother figure because my grandmother Maria had leukemia, and back then they didn't know how to treat it, and so she was very weak, and she was getting weaker every day. So my my aunt Isabel became the mother figure, did all the cooking. She actually dropped out of school to do that. The next person is my uncle Jesse. Okay. Uh, then my father, Rudy Sr., and then uh, my uncle Willie, and the youngest, my aunt Mary Alice. And I'll tell you some, well, 2 things about her later in the story. But anyway, they all had children. My father had 4. I'm the oldest, and but it kind of goes into the Great Depression, how they had to work, all of them. My father and my Uncle Jesse, who were the 2 oldest boys, would have an ice cart. Back then, they used to call refrigerators ice box. And what it was a true meaning, because they would have to get blocks of ice put on top of the ice box. It would slowly, melt and keep everything cool. But you would have to get a block of ice every morning. So before school, my dad and Uncle Jesse would push this ice cart. They lived near this factory that had ice, and they would cut it up and put it in a cart. And they would go door to door selling these blocks of ice. And then they would come home and clean up and then go to school. And but they did other odd jobs too to help out. My grandfather was very hardworking man, good with his hands. He would make his own tools or repair tools that were discarded, and he really did very well without any education because he didn't go to school. Uh, there was one scene where it's out of It's a Wonderful Life, okay, but it's actually factual here because they were evicted from their home because the Great Depression happened. Okay. And so my grandfather was selling shoes at that time, door to door, and he lost his job, so they had to go find a place. So my grandfather Anastasio, my Uncle Jesse, my father, went looking for a place to rent. And they stopped at a store to get some food. And my Uncle Jesse my grandfather Anastasio told my Uncle Jesse, go inside and ask if there's any homes they know about for rent. And my Uncle Jesse went and asked the storekeeper there, and he says, as a matter of fact, there's a house just around the corner, and it's on Conti Street, and 301 Conti Street. And the owner passed away, and it's no relatives, so it's there, you know, and vacant. So Uncle Jesse went back and told my grandfather. They drove to the place, and it looked like a house like from It's a Wonderful Life. It was, scary looking. It was nice and large, but it was scary looking, vacant, dark, and gloomy. And one thing the storekeeper told Uncle Jesse, I left that part out, is that nobody wanted the house because it's haunted. Okay. So Uncle Jesse was very reluctant to tell my grandfather that story, but when they got there and he saw how gloomy it looked, he said, Papa, the storekeeper told me the house is haunted. We're scared. We don't want to go in there. And my grandfather was very, he had to grow up at a young age. Okay. And he had to make things work, make things impossible, make it possible. So he looked at hopefully I won't start crying. He looked at my Uncle Jesse, my father, and he said, Mijos, which is sons in Spanish. Mijos, we're too poor for the ghosts to haunt us. And that worked. That worked. And so he told my father, my Uncle Jesse, stay here. I want to go back and get some belongings and the family come bring them over here. So he made several trips, and my Uncle Jesse and my dad had to stay there at the house on the doorstep, just in fear, thinking that the ghost was going to come haunt them. But nothing happened, of course. And so they all moved in on this, and they actually lived in that house for 10 years rent free.
Wow.
I know. So, but they cleaned it up just like, It's a Wonderful Life and everything, painted and everything else, and got it all nice and decorated. So it's a totally amazing and such. Um, Over the years, they grew up, and World War II happened, and my Uncle Jesse was really too young to enlist at the time, and but he knew he would be drafted once he turned 18, and so sure enough, he turned 18 and he was drafted, and he went into the Army. And since he knew how to work with his hands like my grandfather did, he was making boots, and he didn't want to do that. He actually wanted to see action. Okay. He wanted to go and protect our country and save the world. And anyway, he finally got into action. Okay. And then the Battle of the Bulge happened. And you know that story, the Battle of the Bulge, yeah. And anyway, the Allies were surrounded. It was dark and gloomy, very cold, low cloud cover, so they couldn't drop supplies to the troops. And kind of go back from that time, this was around Christmas time, but around Thanksgiving, the Mexican tradition is to make tamales for Christmas. So they would make them at Thanksgiving, eat some at Thanksgiving, but freeze the rest for Christmas. So my Aunt Mary Alice was the youngest. My Aunt Isabel was the oldest female. So she was kind of in charge. My grandmother was in the distance, like giving the instructions what to do. And so Aunt Mary Alice, being the youngest, and she was just playing with her cats, she got in trouble by her older sister, Aunt Isabel, who told her, quit being mischievous. If you don't want to help, okay, go write a letter to Jesse and tell them we're making tamales for Christmas. So she got a pen and paper and just wrote down real simple. And she had a tamale in her hand at the time. So she goes, Dear Jesse, we're making tamales for Christmas. Wish you were here. And then she goes, love your family. And she gets to tamale. She says, that idea because it keeps falling down, crumbs of it on the letter. So she gets the tamale and rubs it across the face of the letter. She seals it, puts it in the envelope, and gives it to her older sister, Isabel. After the tamale were cooking and everything, well, tamales were cooking, they told, she went and addressed the letter to Jesse. And she, for some reason, had his address on it. I don't know how they did it back then. And so she put it in the mail. She said a prayer. She put it in the mail, and it went on its way. jumping back to the Battle of the Bulge. Okay. The Allies were surrounded. The Germans had their winter clothes, full ammunition, their Panther tanks and everything else. And the Allies were doing a great job repelling them, but they were still getting some places getting overrun. And everybody was dying everywhere. And my Uncle Jesse got in his foxhole and he said a prayer. And he said, "Dear Lord, if you save me from this war, I promise you I'll dedicate my life to you." And a little time later, a few days later, this one plane flew over the Allied position. How it found them, we don't know, because low cloud cover. And so they dropped this mail back with a few supplies, okay? And they get the supplies, some is ammunition and some is just food provisions and all this. But it was still cold because it was snowy and they didn't have winter clothing. And so most of the guys were just, you know, hugging, you know, cuddled together. And the lieutenant got the mail bag and he started reading out the names of the mail. And he would, you know, read like Wilson, Smith, Thomas, Rodriguez, Reyes. And my Uncle Jesse didn't even look up because he goes, "Who would send me a letter? No, I'm not even married, don't have a girlfriend." And the lieutenant looked at my Uncle Jesse, "Jesse Reyes, this is for you." So he goes, yep. He walks and he's shocked. So he gets the letter and he goes back to his foxhole and he opens it up. And the first thing he does, he smell scents of tamales, the little crumbs there, and he reads the letter and he starts to cry because he knew that was God's response to his prayer. And anyway, all the Texas boys who were huddled together smelled the tamale and they all fought for it. And it got all torn up to pieces and everything else. But God made his point and all this. And sure enough, my Uncle Jesse went through the whole duration of the war without a scratch. One time, the lead soldier would have a BRM rifle, Brownie automatic rifle. That's what it is, BAR. And he would take the lead because he'd be spraying at the enemy where the other troops were behind him. And he got killed. And so the lieutenant picked my Uncle Jesse to be the lead person. I mean, it's almost 100% chance he was going to get killed, okay? But he didn't, not even a scratch. He went through the whole duration of the war without a scratch, all this. And sure enough, when he got home, okay, he told the family, he read the letter and they're all happy and this and that and such. He met his wife, my aunt, Frances, on a bus. And he's the one that gave up his seat for her. And that's how they started a little conversation. They finally got married, had two sons, Jesse Jr. and Edward, and that. And but there's a lot of details in there about how they were growing up and this and that. This is the fun part of it. The funny part of the story is all these years we heard one version of the tamale letter. Okay. My Aunt Isabel, the oldest, who was a mother figure, took credit for writing the letter all these years. And it wasn't later into after she passed away that my Aunt Mary Alice said, "I need to correct the story. I need to tell you the truth. Now that Isabel is gone to heaven, I'm the one that wrote the letter. And I just did what Isabel told me to. And so I go, wow, all these years we've heard this. And so, you know, and so that was the funny part. And the sad part is that all five have gone to heaven, all this. But Mary Alice, the youngest, was the last one to go. She recently passed away maybe 3 months ago.
Sorry.
Um, by the grace of God, I actually got my book editions, okay, from Covenant Books. And I said, I need to take this to my Aunt Mary Alice. Now she was at home, but she was bedridden and she had a nurse by her side all the time and her daughter. And so I went and took her the book in person. I autographed it for her and I told her. And she couldn't talk. She would open her eyes every now and then and such. But when I told her about the book and how I wrote about her situation, you could see the gleam in her eye. She knew what I was saying on this. Then after that, maybe a month later, she passed away and such. So I felt God gave me that opportunity to do that and write that and dedicate that book to her too and such. But it's an excellent book, uh, full of family stories. Uh, it took a long time to write it because I had to go, like I said, and talk to my other cousins about their version of it and what was correct. And one of the funniest parts, I'm going backwards now, was when my Uncle Jesse was working for the storekeeper. He had he was sweeping the floors, and these um, Mexican soldiers came in, and um, they would be drinking and all this, partying and eating and all this, and doing stuff all over the floor and this and that. One of the soldiers had a ring on his finger, but it was loose. And then one time he looked up and says, "What happened to my ring?" And they go, "Oh," the other soldier, "Oh, that ring's always been loose. You probably dropped it on the floor." So he looking everywhere, and he couldn't find it. Then he saw my grandfather, and says, you stole my ring," because it was a big pile of trash he was sweeping together. And he was accusing my grandfather of stealing his ring. And he went to my grandfather, and said, "Where's my ring?" He grabs my grandfather by the collar, almost picking him up, he's about to slap. And uh, my grandfather would just cringe and he closed his eyes because he thought he was going to be slapped. And then before he slapped him, another soldier says, look at your pants cuff. There's something shining in there." So the soldier bends over and finds his ring and puts it on. And they all start laughing and this and that. And so, and the storekeeper didn't even, he saw all this and he wouldn't even stop the soldier. Okay. And so my grandfather ran out to cry outside. And by the time the soldiers were drunk and wanted to go back to the barracks to sleep it off, the guy with the missing ring saw my grandfather and laughed at him and says, "You're lucky I found my ring, boy," and walked away. Yeah, I know. And so my grandfather walked slowly, crying back to the store. And the storekeeper was yelling, "Where have you been? You need to clean all this mess up." This and so but the good thing is the storekeeper's wife really showed caring love to my grandfather. But it's stories like that. It's really truly amazing. And I had to put it together and all this. And so I promised my family I would, but I had to wait till after my Uncle Jesse passed away. So that would stop me from writing it years ago. But it's a wonderful book. I wish I could make it more detailed. It's shorter than I thought it would be, but it's still an excellent book to read and all this. It talks about true family values and how they kept together during the Great Depression and everything else, and moved on. And my father, aunts, and uncles, um, all had that same family, you know, uh, uh, trait that they taught their children. We all been very strong Christian people, and we've gone on to there, and so and I tell these stories to my children, so and my grandchildren, so it's going to be on. And so here's the book. He says, "Here, read it," and they do. They love it. So
It's amazing. I mean, such an incredible just family legacy,
yes,
just passed down. And so I mean, and obviously, I mean, I feel like I already know I feel like now I already know your family. I mean, and that's a good thing. It sounds like an incredible legacy, that really started with your grandfather. And so
yes.
that's incredible. But obviously, like, I feel like I do already know the answer to this question, but I'd like to ask you anyway. I mean, what was really the inspiration? Was it just tracking the legacy and sharing that so it could move forward?
There were several reasons. Is that, like I said, we've heard these stories all our lives since we were little kids and adults and this and that. And I love to write. Tamale Letter is my third book. Two have been published. My first book I wrote 25 years ago. And but I just did it to say I wrote a book. I didn't seek a publisher or anything. And but it was really my lovely, beautiful wife who says, I believe in you. I hear these stories. You need to put this passion you have in you into words so people can hear it or read it. And uh, because you have all this passion. And I go, thank you. So the first book I wrote was called Marilyn. It was based on Marilyn Monroe, but it's a science fiction book, really. And it's a hologram that this guy invents, and he loved Marilyn Monroe just like I do. And so he has this image. But when I talked to my publisher, Company Books, says you need to rewrite it and change the name because it could be a lawsuit. So I'm going to rewrite it and call it Angelica. And she's going to have black hair, not blonde hair. So that's it. So, but the second book is called Faith. It's based on several people's tested faith, and it's a wonderful book. Again, it's fictional. And then the third book I wrote, of course, it's a Tamale Letter. I'm starting my fourth book called The Home. And I think it's going to be an excellent book because that was a God inspiration too. It started when we went to go visit my mother-in-law in her nursing home. And uh, when my wife and her two sisters wanted to be alone with their mother in the room, I got up and went to the cafeteria area just to kind of give them their time. And I could feel God telling me, look around you. So I started looking around you. Okay, it's a cafeteria, and there's older people there, some more incoherent and all this. And I says, he says, I need you to write a book about them, but this time, I want you to write about their inner spirits. I go, okay, this. So I started getting this idea and inspiration. I go, wow, I'm going to write it. And it's based on the book. It's called The Nursing Home. It's called The Home, but it's really St. Mary's uh, Nursing Home. It's run by nuns, and their patients there are elderly, incoherent, and all this. Some can talk, some can't. And what happens is around midnight every night, their inner spirits, it's not ghosts. I don't want people to understand it's ghosts. It's their inner spirits. They're coming out, and they gather in the cafeteria area and start talking. But the thing is, their inner spirits are younger versions of themselves, but they know each other. And what happens is some of them don't believe in anything, God or anything. they've been through several bad situations in their life. And the other spirits who do believe and who were saved get to talking to these other spirits and trying to convince them. And they do and all this. But it's like 5 individual plus their families, which can be involved in this book. And it's going to go, and then uh, they glow. But the ones who don't believe are very dim. The ones who believe are even brighter. But what happens is they can sense when someone's going to pass away because they can feel the glowness from inside the other person on their deathbed. So they all gather around. The other patients and the other uh, uh, nuns and family members can't see the inner spirits, but they're there and they can see the person rising to go to heaven, and this and that. So, but it's going to be a wonderful book. I love it. I just need to get time to sit down and write it. So still have a full-time profession. I'm a realtor, so I'm working all the time. Uh, and so, but have plans for maybe altogether 10 books.
That's incredible.
Yeah, one's a children's book, and I got the inspiration about my grandchildren, and we have 10 grandchildren scattered everywhere across the nation. And so, but have 2 grandsons who are remarkable because they have this love for each other, and now they have a third brother, and they love to play with toys over here, and boys are boys, and so you know what, I'm gonna write a book about this farm, and I'm going to include my children in the farm and their spouses, and all this, and it's called Robo Dog, and what it is a robot dog, okay. And it's nothing like Paw Patrol. Okay, I want to make sure that's understood. And what the robot dog does, it can actually speak to other dogs and all this. So what happens is my grandsons, okay, get inside the robo dog because it's pretty large. It's like maybe 5 feet long, and it can fly. And so it goes and starts searching for lost dogs, for dog in need. And they bring him back to the ranch, the farm, and my daughter is in it. She's a veterinarian, and then her husband Jesse is the bank finance person, and then my son Michael is the computer whiz, so he helps build this robo dog and all this, and but that's like the first book, and then the second book is called Robo Dog Meets Robo Cat. Okay, so same thing. They make a cat and they go looking for lost cats or kittens, and then bring them back to the farm and all this. So, but
Fun.
yeah, but it could see like it could be in the several series, and so
Right.
yeah.
No, I love that. Well, and I mean, we've heard so many amazing things that you've shared today, and I really appreciate it. And
Thank you.
is there anything that, I mean, obviously you have so many powerful messages that, have come through in this, but if you could leave everyone with one message, just what would be a message that you would like to leave with your audience?
If God gives you a well, I always pray about this. Let me kind of rephrase that. If God tells you what your mission in life is, you need to seek it. Okay. And in my prayer closet, I always tell God, God, show me the way. If I stumble, I know you'll carry me. And just keep on and on and on and on. And then the devil's there. He'll put blockades there, but God with his hands will move them out of the way. And you just need to continue doing that. That's why I started writing late in my life, but God gave me the inspiration. I remember one time, you know, I I was really depressed because I says, what do you need me to do? And he said 3 words to me. It was a whisper in my ear, and but it spoke volumes. These 3 words he said was right, right, right. I go, that's it. So, so that's what gave me more of a dedication in my life to do is to write. And again, like I said, with a strong wife I have, she loves and encourages me, and she just gets emotional and all this. So, plus she's my editor too. So, you misspelled this word.
Well, this has been amazing, and thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Sure,
And we hope to. I'm sure we'll be hearing from you again soon
of
with more
course, yes,
updates on all of your books. And I hope you'll join us again, and we can talk again soon. And
I will.
thank you so much for today.
Thank you. God bless.
Thanks.